Diane makes her way up. Diane is, I'm so happy that Diane is here. She is a professor at Simon Fraser University, has been doing work with virtual reality, mainly for pain, for far longer than I ever knew virtual reality existed. So she's going to tell us about her research in chronic pain and in other areas. So thank you so much for being here with us today.
Sure thing.
And this is for you.
Thanks. Thanks, Brennan, for your invitation and you for all coming. So I'm going to talk today about VR and self-awareness. And usually the idea is I give talks and I show lots of data and it's about one small study. But I've been doing this for 30 years. And so I thought it would be perhaps a bit more valuable to take a bigger picture as well. So, my education is in design and computer science, so I make things. And I bring this up because the universities I went to were enormously expensive, and I found that the best paying job on campus was being a programmer in 1979, so that's what I've been doing ever since. And I worked at these places, and this is important because each one of them had certain approaches, a human-centered computing approach and a patient-centered design approach. So it's not, to me, an abstract idea, it's in my bones. It's what I think about and do every day, all day. Again, it's not an abstract idea, but in addition to involving patients from the very beginning of an idea, we also have caregivers, health experts of all sorts, nonprofits and other stakeholders like the FDA and policymakers and so on. So it looks more like this. So in my lab, in and out every day, are a lot of people I collaborate with. And in addition, I'm a chronic pain patient myself. So I've been living with it since 1982. And as a patient, I understand Dante's circles of hell. I know what this is like from a first-hand perspective. And along with all the sequelae, so it's not just the pain itself, but all these other things that can tend to cascade and get worse over time. But as a researcher, it accelerates my ability to recruit patients and to have collaborators who allow me to be embedded in their pain clinics. So that's what I do many days of the week. And in addition to learning the clinical practices and the regulations and all the barriers, also we work together to affect knowledge translation. So these are the people I work with. This is what some of them look like. And as you saw, if I can go backwards, maybe not. Nope. You can access all the data of my studies here. And I have these two areas because I'm a geek, so the ACM and IEEE are where all the geek publications are, and PubMed and Cochrane are where the health research studies are. And hopefully there'll be a bridge across the two someday, but there isn't right now. So this is my approach to VR research. And it looks suspiciously like this, which Brennan just showed us. First, though, I thought we should define pain according to the International Association for the Study of Pain. And it includes both body and self. So notice there's a sensory and emotional aspect to this. And chronic pain is different because it persists. Some definitions have 12 weeks. I usually go the most conservative route, so more like 12 months. And some pain doctors consider it to be a complex condition or disease in its own right. Its causes aren't always identifiable. There are no biomarkers and there's no cure. So it's kind of the Wild West of medicine. So how did I approach this? I took the most recent theory of pain. There's only 4 in the Western world, which seems to me amazing given that it's a primary experience. and mapped it onto clinical practices in pain clinics and asked, how could VR be deployed in these multiple areas over time, because the chronic part of chronic pain suggests it's longitudinal. So I looked at the ecosystem, kind of the broader context that is chronic pain, and asked, how can we provide patients with the best that VR can offer over time? So to do that, we need to understand chronic pain from a biopsychosocial perspective, which is a key approach for pain researchers. And again, this is an abstract idea, but in reality, I found over the past 30 years that chronic pain patients often have some degree of sensitization. So to light, to sound, one of my grad students did a dissertation on sound sensitivity, to touch and pressure of even wearing a head-mounted display. Often, as Mel Slater's work suggests, there's altered perceptions of spatial proximity. And Laura Mar Mosley's work also investigates that. And kind of a guarding, an unconscious way to protect oneself that can throw off posture and other things. And next, we need to understand clinical practices. What's actually possible? Since World War II, when chronic pain was first defined and considered, there have been a number of different institutions that tried to put together multidisciplinary pain centers, but they're notoriously difficult to sustain financially. And that continues to be a big problem. But also, I found from clinician to clinician, it depends what they're willing to do. So some are very interested in precision medicine and personalized health and those kinds of approaches, and some aren't. The third thing we need to know is to really get patients' lived experience. So from a biological perspective, what's the character of that pain? Is it neuropathic pain? Using the McGill Pain Questionnaire, is it stabbing? Is it, heat-related? What kind of pain is it? How does it change? What affects it? What works for the patient and doesn't work? How does it affect that patient's ability to function or their quality of life? And from a psychological perspective, what are the patient's hopes and ability to cope? Because as Brennan said, emotion is a key component of pain, and or the second arrow. And there are uncertainties in grief, and this is a really unexplored area, I think. And that is, patients often talk about who they were before chronic pain and who they are because of it. And finally, from a social perspective, because patients are in pain, it's often hard to be active and it's easy to become socially isolated. Stigma exists on an everyday level. Compassion fatigue is also frequent. So there's a lot of work to be done in that realm as well. So over the last 30 years, I identified in these small studies what chronic pain patients can and can't tolerate. And the thing about doing research in the geek world is our studies are usually small and fast because by the time we get IRB approval and get it published, the next generation of technology is out, right? So it's a very kind of fast approach to research. But it has the same controls and in other ways is very parallel to health research. So I've looked at what's a dosage? How long is an actual experience in VR to get a particular effect? How long does that persist? What are the timing of responses to interaction? So how able are patients to react and interact with the virtual environment? And what kind of frequency of stimuli can they tolerate? And this is a really key point. It's not game design, because game design typically the goal is stimulation, right? And stimulation can provoke anxiety or catastrophization. And like I said, the kinds of sensitivities that some patients develop over time, they don't respond well to games. And also different kinds and levels of sound. So this is an example. There's a big difference in sound sensitization in genders according to age. And again, now in terms of a maker, someone who creates these things, what kinds of visuals one uses. Saturated colors, computer scientists love to do, but it's not a good idea typically. And where certain visual elements are placed. So for example, if you have animations that are of high contrast right here, it can easily provoke a panic attack. And the speed and sense of walking or vection really, really matters, as well as a patient's ability to tolerate artifacts such as pixel jitter, or the kind of little computer graphic things that drive some of us nuts. And we need to involve other stakeholders. The more we can do this up front, to pick up the phone with the FDA, who typically has new and even newer approaches, it seems, month to month, and say, is this going to work? What about this? Have you considered this aspect? And also rehabilitation kinds of institutes and government policy makers. And finally, we need to understand the VR technology as you would a pharmaceutical. So just as you would think about certain different kinds of pharmaceuticals and what their effects are, you may not be a pharmacist, but you've educated yourself to know that kind of difference. It's possible to do that with the technology too. So what's it good for? What are its limitations? How accessible is it? How usable is it? How feasible is it to sustain a particularly difficult question? And what's the role of content? And that question, again, is one that we've barely even touched. One way to understand VR technology, so if any health professionals here want a workshop on how to understand VR technology, call me. Because knowing these kinds of things may look like a foreign language, but really they're not, especially when you have them in your hands. So the technological components and the methods of interaction, this is what I specialize in for people who have chronic pain. And I know that Steve Jobs would be rolling in his grave right now, because somehow we've forgotten ease of use, and especially in an emergency room, for example, or any health situation, the ease of use, how easy and fast it is to pick up a VR device and put it on a patient is one of the most important things. And you just cannot have glitches. Some of us in computer science tend to operate on smoke and mirrors sometimes because we know we can fix things, but we want to show you the thing we invented as soon as we can. That doesn't work here. So my approach now has three parts, and it's the result of all these questions of making and breaking and testing and updating and optimizing and debugging and testing some more. So the first approach I have is to wind down, because many chronic pain patients have a hypersensitivity of some sort. And so the key is really to use VR to help patients wind down. Now this is trickier than I think most people who don't live with chronic pain suspect, because you're asking people who are in pain to face their pain, right? To meet it, to dance with it, to engage with it. My second approach is to build up, because while patients need to wind down, on the other hand, they typically stop being as physically active. Their mobility decreases over time, and they need to keep some sort of physical activity. and muscle mass and aerobic health. So that's what the build-up part is about. And I track that over time. And finally, empathy and stigma are two things that I look at and deal with. And everything here is evidence-based, so we test everything. Every component, the whole system, patients, how feasible is it to be in a pain doctor's clinic or a hospital. So we do these kinds of studies. And now I'm going to give you an example of each one of those three. So first, the wind down example. I have about 17 VR systems, so this is one example. For winding down, it's to build self-awareness via mindfulness-based stress reduction to help patients self-modulate their own pain and help them build resilience over time. So the picture on your left is the patient is wearing a biofeedback device, so it's galvanic skin response and heart rate variability, while they're in this virtual forest. So this is about an 11-year-old.
Which users will learn a walking form of meditation. Data from the
So they hear
physiological
Kabat-Zinn
sensors attached
take
to your
them
body
through a
will
kind of
modulate
vocal
certain aspects of
tutorial,
the environment.
and when their physiological aspects change, so their galvanic skin response, for example, it goes from foggy to less and less foggy over time. The sun comes out and the sound subtly changes from stereo to spatialized. Because some patients think that meditation still is voodoo or something, no matter how many studies I show them. But that kind of feedback really seems to provide concrete evidence of a sort. And in addition to this, we print out the results of that session for patients, and that too kind of reinforces that, yeah, that really did actually happen. We capture the data, we track it, display it, compare it, and visualize it over time. So we have a version that patients are introduced to in a pain clinic, and then there's a take-home version that they use too. And this is our next approach. I used to have CPU envy. I used to, really want the best computer, the fastest chip speed. Now I have Tesla coil envy. So we just got a new fMRI machine. And the most important thing, of course, with chronic pain, I think, is to conduct longitudinal studies. Now, geeks, the way we're funded, it's very difficult to do that. So I rely on my pain medicine collaborators to kind of garner funding that can enable us to do this. So we have finished up a study with 100 patients who use VR at home. So we took a PC and put VR on it. Patients can't use anything else. That's all the PC can do. And they have to use it for a minimum of 30 minutes, 3 times a week for 9 weeks. And the way we approach this to begin with, and to reiterate the idea that don't think VR game, is we first took all the VR games we could find that were publicly available, say for example on Steam and elsewhere. We identified 79 of them. We had chronic pain patients play those games in focus groups, and we came up with 4 that they could tolerate, 4 out of 79. So we took those 4, and we mixed those with 2 VR systems that were specifically designed for chronic pain patients in a Latin square, and put that in the machine in patients' homes, and that's the longitudinal study. So the reason I did that is I have a habit of always making sure that I'm not kind of biasing myself. And so my contention is any game kind of off the street isn't going to be as effective as one that's made specifically for chronic pain patients. So again, it's not game design. And we're replicating that study in Beijing at Peking University. So what we're looking at here is the collaboration with that long list of people. We look at these kinds of ideas. I'm particularly interested in self-modulating and interoceptive processes, because that's what really kind of got me the first time I tried VR in 1990, was there was no gravity. And so I had this kind of bizarre extended sense of myself, like I didn't know where my edges were. And it was kind of euphoric and almost like a analgesic. So I've been chasing that idea with body image and body schema and the kind of predictive coding that Giuseppe Riva is looking at, and ideas like neuroplasticity and cortical rehabilitation. So now the second example is to build up. Now this is for aging adults who have arthritis, either osteo or rheumatoid arthritis. And our goal is to help motivate them to practice range of motion exercises. And again, it hurts to move, so that's quite a big hump to get over. And it's on the principle of use it or lose it. It's called LumaPath. And again, we capture and track the range of motion data and the heart rate variability data, which is just a kind of wrist-worn sensor. And patients' self-reported pain levels, their function and quality of life. And we found that it also offers aerobic benefits, and that averages from 70 to 82%. And this is what it looks like. I think you have to hit play. Here it comes. So this is what a team of 1 master's student and 3 undergrads can do in a summer. It's a steampunk ship that goes to different planets. And here's a range of motion exercise. I thought, steampunk? Aging adults? Really? What we didn't get until patients told us, think of patients are 65 to about 85 years old, is the ship looks like the Yellow Submarine. If only I was smart enough to have done that purposefully. But that seems to be one reason they really like it. And we collect all sorts of feedback and iterate and that sort of thing. So you see how big a movement these patients are having? When they come in, we videotape them, and then we show them the video after they're done, and they can't believe that they actually moved that much. Next. Okay, so those are examples of the winding down and the building up. And the important thing is the tracking over time. And finally, the empathy and stigma were two areas that I wasn't particularly interested in, but my grad students wanted to work in that area, and there was a competition, and we did. And this is one of the first things we came up with, which is perspective taking. So you inhabit this chronic pain patient, and for kind of off-the-shelf software, this is as old a woman as is depicted in that modeling software. So we have to change that. Anyway, so you are her, and you can hear her self-talk as you're doing the tasks she's doing, and you have the limitations that she has physically as well. And when we first did this, we exhibited at a pain conference in Canada and at the IASP, and we weren't prepared for the response, which was, oh my God, the nursing experts and doctors said, we really need to have health experts do this because they're typically healthy and get frustrated with people who have chronic conditions because it's just, as my pain doctor says, I can lead the horse to water, but they won't drink, right? And so knowing why they're not drinking maybe immediately is useful, we think. These are the works we have in progress. So some of these are the chronic pain sequelae. We learned a lot of things. The first one, PhRMU, is for teens who are undergoing chemotherapy. And I thought a low polygon approach wouldn't go over well with teens who typically are video gamers. And it worked really well because think of books, and when you imagine the character in the book versus the movie, in the same way, a low polygon approach enables teens to plant things that their parents think are carrots, but teens know is pot. So it works in all sorts of ways. These are some of the other VR systems. So we have some for acute pain as well, because part of chronic pain is typically you have a breakthrough pain time when the pain just spikes. So we have those titles, and I'll just end with a very short video to give you a sense of what it's like in my lab. And the mass transit in Vancouver is awesome. So these are our labs. And you'll notice that there usually are not individuals. Everyone works in a team. We typically work hard and fast. We typically engage with the community. And this is collaborators. This is Pain BC, so we go to all of their conferences. Pain BC is a really progressive, interesting nonprofit where pain physicians and other health professionals and patients are together in one conference and aren't separated. It's amazing. And in my classes, I'm trying to build bridges with the hospitals and clinics in the region. And that's it. So you can contact me. Well, anyway. Thanks.